The heavy oak door clicked shut behind Alex, the sound swallowed by the cavernous silence of the marble foyer. He stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the day, of the elaborate lie he had just set in motion, settle onto his shoulders. He loosened his tie, the silk whispering against his collar. The house, a sprawling monument to his wife's taste, felt colder than usual. It was a space designed for showcasing success, each polished surface reflecting a life of curated perfection. Tonight, Alex had come home to shatter that reflection. He had spent the last 6 months orchestrating this moment, a complex, multi-layered strategy that was now, finally, in play. The first casualty he knew would be his own reputation within these walls. He found Isabella in the living room, a space so white and minimalist it felt less like a home and more like a modern art gallery. She was perched on the edge of a stark white sofa, a glass of Chardonnay in her hand, its pale gold catching the light from the recessed ceiling. She didn't look up. Her posture was rigid, a sculpture of tense disapproval. "You're late," she said, her voice as crisp and cool as the wine she was drinking. It wasn't a question or a greeting, but an accusation. "I had to stay," Alex replied, his own voice quiet, measured. He walked over to the built-in bar, the thick pile of the rug muffling his footsteps. He didn't want a drink. He just needed a place to anchor himself. "We need to talk." That got her attention. She finally turned her head, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arching in mild irritation. "If this is about the caterers for the fundraiser, I've handled it. The salmon is out. We're going with the sea bass." Alex's hand rested on the cool granite of the countertop. He turned to face her fully, his expression carefully neutral. He had rehearsed this, but no amount of practice could truly prepare him for the look he knew would soon be on her face. "It's not about the fundraiser, Izzy. It's about my job." She sighed, a theatrical exhalation of impatience. "Alex, I am really not in the mood for another one of your thrilling tales from the world of structural engineering. Did you use a new kind of concrete? Fascinating. Just tell me you remembered to confirm our tea time for Saturday." The casual condescension was a familiar blade, one he had grown accustomed to over the years. It had once been subtle, a paper cut here and there. Lately, it had become a dagger. "There's been a restructuring at the firm," he said, keeping his tone even. "A major one." For the first time, a flicker of genuine interest appeared in her eyes, quickly followed by suspicion. "What does that mean? Did you get the London project? Richard said the competition was fierce." Richard was her father. His name was often invoked as a benchmark against which Alex invariably fell short. "No," Alex said. He took a steadying breath. Here it was, the first domino. "I didn't get the London project. In fact, I'm no longer heading the international division." Isabella set her glass down on the coaster with a sharp, deliberate click. The silence in the room deepened. "What are you talking about?" "My role has been reevaluated," he said, choosing the corporate jargon he knew she would despise. "The board is moving in a new direction. They're bringing in someone new to lead the division. I've been reassigned." Her eyes narrowed, scanning his face for the punchline. When she found none, the carefully constructed mask of board superiority began to crack. "Reassigned? Reassigned where? What does that mean, Alex? Stop speaking in riddles." "It means I'm no longer a senior partner," he said, the words feeling alien in his mouth, a script from a play about another man's life. "They're putting me back on domestic projects, mid-level commercial stuff. It's a demotion, Izzy." He watched the word land. He saw it hit her like a physical blow. The color drained from her face, replaced by a flush of angry disbelief. Her mouth opened, then closed. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of the wine fridge. Then she stood up, her body trembling with a rage that seemed to vibrate in the air. She walked towards him, her steps sharp and aggressive on the polished floor. She stopped just inches from him, her eyes, the color of stormy seas, blazing with a fury that was part betrayal, part disgust. She looked him up and down, as if seeing him for the first time. A stranger, a disappointment, an anchor pulling her down. When she finally spoke, her voice was a low, venomous whisper, each word a perfectly polished stone of contempt. "I married a loser." The statement hung in the air between them, simple, devastating, final. It was the culmination of 1,000 small dismissals, the unspoken truth of their marriage finally given voice. Alex felt a strange, cold calm settle over him. He had expected it to hurt more. Instead, it felt like confirmation. He had set a test, and she had failed it in the first 10 seconds. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. His face was a mask of weary resignation, but behind his eyes, a silent, meticulous calculation was taking place. The game had begun. If you're just joining us, welcome. I'm so glad you're here for this journey. What would you do in a moment like this? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying the story so far, do me a favor and tap that like button and subscribe to the channel. You are not going to want to miss how this ends. Now, let's get back to it. 6 months earlier, Alex had been standing on the unfinished 48th floor of the Titan Tower, a building he had designed from its first conceptual sketch to its current state as a steel skeleton clawing at the sky. The wind whipped around him, a mournful howl that carried the scent of rain and wet concrete. Beside him stood Marcus Thorne, his mentor and the only other founding partner of Sterling Designs. Marcus was a man carved from granite and wisdom, his face a roadmap of decades spent battling gravity and budgets. "It's a beautiful monster, Alex," Marcus said, his voice a low rumble that was nearly lost to the wind. He gestured out at the sprawling cityscape below. "And soon it will be just one of many." Alex didn't look at the view. He was staring at the blueprints clutched in his hand, the paper flapping furiously. "The offers are solid. All three of them are feeling the pressure. The supply chain disruptions we engineered are working. They're bleeding capital." "And your father-in-law?" Marcus asked, his eyes sharp. "Richard is a shark. He'll smell blood in the water." "He already does," Alex confirmed, "but he thinks the blood is mine. He's been advising one of our competitors, Vantage Architecture, to hold out. He thinks Sterling is overextended, that we're vulnerable." Alex allowed a small, grim smile. "He's telling everyone I'm a good designer, but a terrible businessman, that I have no killer instinct." Marcus chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "The best way to hunt a shark is to pretend you're a drowning seal. What's the final play?" This was it, the heart of the strategy, the part that was both professionally necessary and personally terrifying. "I'm going to prove him right," Alex said, "publicly. I'm going to take a fall. We'll leak to the financial press that our international projects are underperforming. We'll announce a restructuring. You will be named interim CEO, citing my managerial shortcomings. I'll be demoted, sent back to the drafting table, so to speak." Marcus was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "That's a deep cover, son. It will put you through a personal hell. Are you sure Isabella and her family won't be a complication?" The question was gentle, but it carried the weight of years of observation. Marcus had been at their wedding. He had attended the christenings. He had seen the subtle, constant ways Isabella and her family had sought to diminish Alex, to treat his quiet competence as a charming but ultimately unimpressive character trait. Alex clutched a simple, worn leather portfolio he carried everywhere. It looked unassuming, but inside were the signed, confidential letters of intent from the 3 companies he was about to acquire. It was the source of his secret power. He ran his thumb over the worn corner. "They are the reason this has to work," Alex said, his voice hard. "Richard and his son Leo are Vantage's primary investors. When Vantage goes under, which it will after we announce the merger, they stand to lose everything they've put in, and more. This isn't just about business anymore, Marcus. This is about seeing who stands with you when the lights go out." "And you think Isabella will?" Marcus asked softly. Alex looked away from the city, his eyes reflecting the cold gray sky. "I have to know," he whispered. Back in the pristine white living room, the echo of Isabella's words still lingered. "I married a loser." He watched her pace back and forth, her movements sharp and agitated, like a caged animal. "A demotion? A demotion! Alex, do you have any idea what this means?" She finally spat, whirling to face him. "My father's annual gala is in 2 months. What am I supposed to say? Oh, hello, everyone. Meet my husband, Alex. He used to be a big shot, but now he designs strip malls in the suburbs." My God, the humiliation. Her humiliation, not ours. He noted the distinction. "It's not that bad, Izzy," he said, the lie tasting like ash. "It's a temporary setback. I'll work my way back up." She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that was completely devoid of humor. "Work your way back up? You're not some kid just starting out. You're 45 years old. People don't work their way back up from this. They fade away. They become irrelevant." She ran a hand through her perfectly styled hair, her fingers trembling. "This is a disaster, an absolute catastrophe." Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She snatched it up. "It's my mother," she hissed. "I was supposed to call her an hour ago to confirm dinner on Friday. What am I supposed to tell them?" "The truth," Alex said quietly. She stared at him as if he had just suggested they set the house on fire. "The truth? The truth is that my husband has just torpedoed his career, and by extension, my entire social standing. No thank you. I will not be telling them the truth. I will come up with something. I'll say you're taking on a special, low-profile project, something discreet." She was already spinning the story, constructing a new reality to present to the world. It was what her family did best. Image was everything. Substance was an afterthought. "Don't," Alex said, his voice firmer now. "Don't lie for me, Isabella. They'll find out eventually. It's better it comes from us." "From you," she corrected him, her voice dripping with acid. "This is your failure, Alex, not mine. You can tell them on Friday." She gave him one last look of pure, undiluted contempt. "Try not to stain the carpet with your shame on the way to bed." She swept out of the room, leaving him alone in the echoing silence. He stood there for a long time, his hands still resting on the cool granite. He felt the sting now, a dull ache spreading through his chest. This was worse than he had imagined. The speed and totality of her rejection were breathtaking. He walked over to the sofa and picked up his leather portfolio from where he'd set it down. He opened it. The signed letters of intent were tucked neatly inside, a silent testament to the truth. He ran his finger over the signature of the CEO of Vantage Architecture, the company her father was championing. It was a signature of surrender. He closed the portfolio. Friday, he thought. Friday would be the next test, and he had a feeling it would be a bloodbath. The drive to Isabella's parents' house was a study in frigid silence. Alex drove the sleek, dark gray sedan, a car that had once been a symbol of his success and now, in the space of 3 days, felt like a borrowed costume. Isabella sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, a rigid statue of displeasure. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere dress that probably cost more than the monthly salary he was now supposedly earning. The air between them was thick with unspoken recriminations. "Are you just going to sit there in silence?" she finally asked as they turned onto the long, winding driveway of her parents' estate. The house wasn't a house, it was a declaration. A massive, neoclassical mansion of pale stone that loomed over acres of manicured lawns, designed to intimidate and impress in equal measure. "What would you like me to say, Izzy?" Alex asked, his voice calm. "You could start by telling me how you're going to handle this," she snapped. "How you're going to explain this situation to my father." "I was planning on telling him the truth," Alex said, pulling the car to a stop in the circular drive, next to a fountain featuring 3 marble lions wrestling a serpent. "The truth is unacceptable," she hissed, turning to him. Her face was a mask of desperation. "Alex, please, for me, Can you just soften it? My father respects strength. He despises weakness. If you go in there looking like a kicked puppy, he will tear you to shreds, and he will never, ever let me forget it. Before Alex could respond, the heavy front door of the mansion swung open. Richard Thorne stood silhouetted in the doorway, a large, imposing man with a mane of silver hair and an air of unshakable self-importance. Beside him was Isabella's brother, Leo, a younger, sleeker version of his father, with the same arrogant smirk permanently etched on his face. "There they are," Richard boomed, his voice carrying across the drive. "Isabella, darling, and Alex, good to see you. Heard things at Sterling are getting a bit turbulent." The attack had begun before they were even out of the car. Alex felt Isabella flinch beside him. He got out, closing the door with a solid, definitive thud. He met Richard's gaze across the polished stone. "Richard, Leo, good to see you." Inside, the house smelled of beeswax and money. They were led into a cavernous study lined with leather-bound books that Alex was certain had never been opened. A fire roared in a fireplace large enough to roast a pig. Drinks were poured, single malt scotch for Richard and Leo, a glass of water for Alex. Isabella took a large glass of red wine. "So," Richard began, settling into a massive leather armchair that looked more like a throne. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. Isabella was uncharacteristically vague on the phone. Just said there was some news at the firm. "I trust it's not all doom and gloom, although my sources tell me Sterling is looking a bit shaky, taking on too much debt, chasing vanity projects. A classic case of eyes bigger than your stomach." He looked directly at Alex. Alex felt a familiar tightening in his gut. This was their game, a verbal chess match where they controlled the board and all the pieces. He refused to play. "There was a restructuring," Alex said, his voice even. "The board decided to move in a new direction with the international division." Leo, who had been lounging against the mantelpiece, let out a short, derisive laugh. "Restructuring? Is that what we're calling it these days? I heard they put Marcus Thorne back in charge, bringing the old guard out of retirement. Never a good sign." "Marcus is a capable leader," Alex said simply. Of course," Richard said, waving a dismissive hand. "A good man, but a bit of a dinosaur. Not an innovator like you were supposed to be. So if Marcus is running the show, where does that leave you, Alex? Polishing his shoes?" Isabella, who had been staring intently into her wineglass, finally looked up. Her eyes pleaded with Alex. "Say something. Fight back. Defend yourself." But what she really meant was, "Defend me. Defend my honor." "My role has changed," Alex said, ignoring Richard's jibe. "I'm focusing on domestic projects now. It's a chance to get back to basics, back to the fundamentals of design." Leo snorted. "Fundamentals? You'll be designing parking garages and dentist offices. How thrilling. I remember when you were designing skyscrapers, Alex. What happened?" The question was designed to humiliate, to paint him as a failure. Alex met Leo's smug gaze. Sometimes building a strong foundation is more important than building the tallest tower. The metaphor was lost on them. To them, height was all that mattered. "Ah, philosophy," Richard boomed, clapping his hands together. "The last refuge of the defeated man." "Look, Alex, let's cut the crap. You were demoted, pushed aside. It happens. The corporate world is a meat grinder. Not everyone is cut out for it." He took a long sip of his scotch. "I've been telling Isabella for years, you're a wonderful artist, a true talent with a pencil and a T-square. But you don't have the killer instinct. You don't have the stomach for the fight." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Take Vantage Architecture, for instance, your main competitor. Now, their CEO, he's a killer. I've been advising them. They're lean, they're hungry. While you were building glass palaces in Dubai, they were consolidating their position here at home. They're poised to eat your lunch, Alex. And when Sterling stumbles, and it will stumble, they'll be there to pick up the pieces." The dramatic irony was so thick Alex could have cut it with a knife. Here was his father-in-law, unknowingly describing the trap that was about to spring on him, all while mocking the man who had set it. Alex had to fight to keep his expression neutral. He saw Isabella looking from her father to him, her face pale. She wanted him to argue, to protest, to show some fire. But he just sat there, absorbing the insults with a quiet dignity that they mistook for weakness. "Perhaps you're right, Richard," Alex said softly. The admission seemed to suck the air out of the room. Richard leaned back, a triumphant smirk on his face. He had won. He had broken him. "Of course I'm right. The first step to recovery is admitting you have a problem." Dinner was an excruciating affair. The conversation revolved entirely around Richard's and Leo's successes. A new acquisition, a soaring stock price, a new yacht. Alex was treated as if he were a piece of furniture. Questions were directed around him. His opinions were not sought. Isabella was quiet, her earlier desperation replaced by a cold, simmering fury directed entirely at him. For failing, for embarrassing her, for proving her father right. As they were leaving, Richard clapped Alex on the shoulder, a gesture that was less friendly and more proprietary. "Chin up, son. There's no shame in knowing your limits. Maybe you can design a new guest house for us. Something modest, of course, to keep your skills sharp." Leo snickered. In the car on the way home, the silence returned, heavier and more oppressive than before. This time, Alex broke it. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said. Isabella turned to him, her face a mask of cold fury in the intermittent glow of the streetlights. "You're sorry? You are sorry?" "No, Alex, I am sorry. I am sorry that I have to be associated with you. I am sorry that I have to go back into that house and listen to my father tell me, 'I told you so,' for the rest of my life. You didn't just get demoted tonight, Alex, you got castrated, and you just let them do it." She turned back to the window, presenting him with her shoulder. "Don't speak to me." Alex drove on, his hands gripping the wheel. He looked at his wife, at the beautiful, cold stranger sitting beside him. He had known this would be hard. He had just never imagined the loneliness would be this profound. He pulled into their driveway and killed the engine. In the sudden silence, he could hear the ticking of the cooling engine and the sound of his marriage fracturing under the strain. He reached for his leather portfolio in the back seat. The weight of it in his hand was a small, secret comfort. It was a reminder that this was not the end. It was the middle of a very long, very carefully planned game, and his move was coming. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in passive aggression. The grand, minimalist house became a geography of avoidance. Alex and Isabella moved through it like ghosts from separate paths, their paths intersecting only by accident, resulting in murmured, insincere apologies and a hasty retreat. Isabella filled the silence with activity. The phone was always attached to her ear, her voice a bright, brittle stream of chatter as she arranged brunches, confirmed gala details, and spoke to her mother and her friends. Alex's name was never mentioned. He had been edited out of the narrative of her life. To Isabella and her family, Alex had become a ghost, a walking embodiment of failure. He would come home from work at a reasonable hour, his briefcase, a cheaper canvas model he had bought for the part, in hand. He would retreat to his home office, a room that had once been the command center for billion-dollar projects and was now, in her eyes, a sad little den where he presumably doodled plans for suburban dental clinics. He would spend hours in there, the door closed. Isabella never asked what he was doing. She didn't want to know. The truth, she imagined, was too pathetic to witness. In reality, the office was more of a war room than it had ever been. The demotion had afforded Alex the one thing he hadn't had in years: time. Uninterrupted, unaccountable time. His days were a whirlwind of encrypted calls, secure video conferences, and private meetings in nondescript hotel conference rooms. He was a phantom, moving through the city's financial and legal back channels, his name never appearing on a single document. Marcus Thorne was the public face of the operation, the stoic, grandfatherly figure weathering the storm at Sterling. But Alex was the hidden engine, the strategist pulling the strings, pushing the levers. He was finalizing the terms of the three acquisitions, structuring the debt, and laying the legal groundwork for the creation of a new parent company, Apex Consolidated Holdings. It was a deliberately bland name, designed to fly under the radar until the moment it didn't. He was also, with a certain grim satisfaction, monitoring the slow, inexorable implosion of Vantage Architecture, his father-in-law's pet company. Richard, true to form, had doubled down on his investment. Convinced that Sterling's weakness was his opportunity, he had poured more capital into Vantage, urging them to be aggressive, to poach Sterling's wavering clients. Alex, through a series of carefully orchestrated leaks, made sure those clients looked very wavering indeed. It was like feeding bait to a shark that was swimming directly towards the propellers of a hidden submarine. One evening, Alex was in his office, on a video call with the legal team in Zurich. He had a stack of documents in front of him, the culmination of months of work. On the screen, a stern-looking Swiss lawyer was droning on about tax liabilities when the door to his office opened without a knock. Isabella stood there, dressed for a night out. She was wearing a shimmering silver dress that clung to her like a second skin. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. She looked magnificent, and she looked at him with an expression of profound disappointment. "I'm going out," she announced, not looking at the screen where the faces of the Swiss legal team were now staring back in polite confusion. "I see that," Alex said, hitting the mute button. "Have a good time." "I'm going to the pre-gala reception at the club," she said, her tone daring him to object, "with Leo and some friends." "Okay," he said, keeping his face impassive. Her eyes fell to the papers on his desk. "Still playing with your little drawings?" she asked, the condescension so natural it seemed like a part of her. "Designing a new doghouse for the neighbors?" "Something like that," he replied, a muscle twitching in his jaw. She let out a small, bitter sigh. "You know, Richard called today. He was crowing about Vantage. They just landed the city's new waterfront development bid, the one you wanted. The one you said was the key to Sterling's future last year." She shook her head. "He actually felt sorry for you, Alex. My father felt sorry for you." She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Don't wait up," she said, and the words carried a chilling finality. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. She was moving on, with or without him. Alex watched her go. He waited until he heard the front door close, followed by the sound of Leo's sports car roaring to life and then fading into the distance. He unmuted his microphone. "My apologies, gentlemen," he said, his voice perfectly steady. "A minor domestic interruption. Now, about the holding structure in Luxembourg." He worked late into the night, fueled by black coffee and a cold, burning resolve. The pain of her words was real, a dull throb in his chest, but it was also fuel. Each insult, each dismissal, was another log on the fire. He looked at the calendar on his desk. The date of his father-in-law's annual charity gala was circled in red. It was 2 weeks away. The event was being held at the new ballroom of the Grand Imperial Hotel, a project whose construction had been managed by Richard's company. It was to be the crowning achievement of his year, a celebration of his power and influence. Alex picked up his phone and made a call to Marcus. "Marcus, it's me. Is the announcement package ready?" "Good. I want to make a change to the rollout. The press release can wait. I want the first announcement to be live, at the Thorne Charity Gala." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Alex," Marcus said slowly, "that's not a business move. That's a theatrical performance." "I know," Alex said, looking out the window at the lights of the city. He could just make out the dark silhouette of the Titan Tower, his tower, against the night sky. "They've been writing a play about me for years. I think it's time I wrote my own final act." He hung up the phone and pulled his leather portfolio onto his lap. He ran his hand over its worn surface. It felt like the calm before a storm that he had spent 6 months planning, and that was now, finally, ready to be unleashed. The quiet in the house no longer felt like a rejection. It felt like potential. The silence before the thunder. The night of the Thorn Charity Gala arrived on a wave of crisp autumn air. It was the social event of the season, a glittering confluence of old money, new tech, and political power. The Grand Imperial Hotel's new ballroom was a spectacle of crystal and gold, a room designed to make even the wealthiest people feel slightly inadequate. Hundreds of guests in tuxedos and couture gowns drifted through the space, their laughter mingling with the clinking of champagne flutes and the soft strains of a string quartet. Alex had arrived alone. He had told Isabella he would be attending, a statement that had been met with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. "You can't be serious," she had said aghast. "Alex, no, absolutely not. You are not going to show up and embarrass me. Stay home, please. It's the one thing you can do for me." "I'll be there," was all he had said. He wore a classic, impeccably tailored tuxedo, a stark contrast to the slightly too tight, off-the-rack suits he had been affecting for the past 2 months. He moved through the crowd with a quiet confidence that drew a few curious glances. He was a known entity, but his recent demotion had made him an object of pity and morbid curiosity. He saw people whispering behind their hands as he passed, their eyes filled with the kind of condescending sympathy that was worse than open mockery. He found a spot near the back, by a towering floral arrangement, and simply watched. He saw Leo holding court, animated and loud, a circle of sycophants laughing at his jokes. He saw Richard, the king in his castle, moving from group to group, accepting congratulations, his face flushed with pride and expensive champagne. And then he saw Isabella. She was a vision in a deep crimson gown that left her shoulders bare. She stood with her father and brother, a radiant smile fixed on her face. But as she laughed at something Leo said, her eyes flickered around the room, a brief, anxious scan. She was looking for him. Not out of concern, he knew, but out of fear. Fear that he would do something to spoil her perfect evening. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A look of pure, cold anger flashed across her face before being replaced by a mask of polite indifference as she deliberately turned her back on him. She leaned in and whispered something to a tall, handsome man standing beside her, the CEO of some fashionable tech startup. The man laughed, placing a familiar hand on the small of her back. Isabella did not pull away. It was the lowest moment, the culmination of months of calculated humiliation, to be rendered invisible by his own wife at the zenith of her family's triumph. The pain was sharp, visceral. It was one thing to strategize this, to anticipate it. It was another thing to feel it. He felt a hand on his arm and turned, expecting a pitying acquaintance. Instead, it was Marcus Thorne. He looked distinguished in his tuxedo, his weathered face calm amidst the glittering chaos. "It's a hell of a party," Marcus said, his voice a low rumble. "They do throw a good one," Alex replied, his gaze drifting back to his wife. Marcus followed his line of sight. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood with Alex, a silent, solid presence. "The final contracts were signed an hour ago," he said quietly. "The wire transfers are complete. Apex Consolidated Holdings is officially the majority shareholder in all three firms, including Vantage Architecture." Alex nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "And the presentation?" "Queued up and ready to go," Marcus said. "The stage manager thinks it's a tribute video for Richard." He looked at Alex, his eyes searching. "Are you ready for this, son? There's no going back after tonight." Alex thought of Isabella's cold fury, of Leo's sneer, of Richard's patronizing clap on the shoulder. He thought of the words, "I married a loser," echoing in the sterile silence of his own home. He reached into his jacket pocket and his fingers brushed against a small, simple object, a USB drive. It contained the presentation, the quiet bomb. "I've been ready for a long time," Alex said. A roll of drums from the stage announced that the formal part of the evening was about to begin. Richard Thorne, beaming, strode to the podium, basking in the applause. Thank you, friends," he boomed, his voice echoing through the ballroom. "Welcome. It is so wonderful to see you all here tonight, supporting such a worthy cause. And to see you in this magnificent room." More applause. Richard launched into a self-congratulatory speech, thanking his board, his partners, and his family. Alex watched Isabella in the front row, her face glowing with pride. She looked up at her father on the stage as if he were a god. "And this is just the beginning," Richard was saying, his voice rising with excitement. "My company, Thorne Enterprises, has always been about looking to the future. And tonight I am thrilled to announce a new partnership, a project that will reshape the very skyline of this great city. We will be working with a new, powerful conglomerate that has quietly and brilliantly consolidated some of the most innovative firms in the industry." Alex saw Leo smirk, thinking he meant Vantage. Richard was playing to his son, to his investors. "This new entity is the future," Richard continued, his chest puffed out. "They are a force to be reckoned with, and I am honored to be their partner of choice. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to the visionary leader, the chairman and CEO of the newly formed Apex Consolidated Holdings." Richard gestured dramatically to the wing of the stage. A spotlight flared to life. The string quartet began a triumphant swell of music. Leo and the Vantage executives in the audience began to applaud, ready to welcome their new king. And from the shadows of the stage wing, Alex walked out. He didn't look at Richard, whose beaming smile was beginning to freeze, a rictus of confusion. He didn't look at the audience, whose applause was faltering, sputtering into a confused silence. He walked calmly to the center of the stage, into the bright, unforgiving glare of the spotlight. He adjusted the microphone, the small sound echoing in the suddenly silent ballroom. He looked directly into the front row. He saw Leo's jaw hanging open. He saw Richard, his face turning a blotchy, unhealthy shade of red. And he saw Isabella. Her face was a canvas of pure, uncomprehending shock. Her radiant smile had evaporated, replaced by a look of dawning horror. The color drained from her face, leaving her crimson dress and lipstick garishly bright against her pale skin. Then Alex turned his gaze to the rest of the room. He took a breath, and he began to speak. "Good evening," Alex said, his voice calm, clear, and amplified to fill every corner of the vast ballroom. The silence was absolute. The string quartet had trailed off, their bows hovering in midair. All eyes were on him, the man they had pitied, the man they had dismissed, now standing at the center of their universe. "My father-in-law is a man who appreciates a dramatic reveal," Alex began, a faint, ironic smile touching his lips. He turned slightly to acknowledge the frozen figure of Richard Thorne, who was staring at him as if he were an apparition. "So I hope you'll forgive me for borrowing a page from his book." He took a small USB drive from his pocket and held it up. "This contains a presentation. The stage manager has it queued, if you could please run it." He nodded to the wings. A moment later, the massive screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying the gala's logo, flickered to life. The simple, powerful logo of Apex Consolidated Holdings appeared, stark and bold in black and white. Below it, in smaller letters, were three other logos, including the familiar brand of Sterling Designs. Then two more logos faded in beside it, the two other firms Alex had been acquiring. A low murmur rippled through the audience as they recognized the names of Sterling's largest competitors. Then a final logo appeared, sliding in below the others. Vantage Architecture. A gasp went through the room. "For the past 6 months," Alex's voice cut through the rising whispers, "my partners and I have been engaged in a complex and, I admit, covert consolidation. While some were focused on building the tallest towers, we were focused on building an unshakable foundation. He paused, letting the words, his words from that humiliating dinner, hang in the air. Tonight, I can announce that Sterling Designs, along with its two largest rivals, have been successfully merged under a new parent company. Apex Consolidated Holdings is now the largest and most influential architectural and development firm in the country, with assets exceeding $10 billion. He let that sink in. The silence had turned from confused to stunned. He saw financial reporters in the crowd scribbling furiously in their notebooks. My former role as head of international projects at Sterling was eliminated, Alex continued, his eyes finding Isabella's in the front row. Because that role, and indeed Sterling Designs itself as a standalone entity, was about to become obsolete. My demotion was a strategic necessity, allowing me to operate without scrutiny as I finalized the terms of the acquisitions. He turned his attention back to the wider audience. And as of 6 p.m. this evening, Apex has also completed a hostile takeover of a fourth company. A company that was over-leveraged, poorly managed, and whose primary investors made some very enthusiastic but ultimately unwise financial decisions. On the screen, the Vantage Architecture logo glowed red and then dissolved into pixels. Vantage is now a wholly owned subsidiary of Apex, Alex stated, his voice flat and final. Its assets will be absorbed, and its redundant leadership will be terminated. He saw Leo lurch forward in his seat as if he'd been physically struck. Richard was gripping the podium for support, his face ashen. Their pet project, their killer company, the vehicle of their hubris, had just been publicly executed. And the man they had mocked as a defeated artist was the one holding the axe. There will be a great deal of change, Alex said, his voice softening slightly, taking on the tone of a visionary leader, the one he had been hiding for months. Our new mission at Apex will be to build smarter, more sustainable, and more beautiful cities. We will invest in innovation, in our people, and in the communities we serve. He took a step forward, closer to the edge of the stage. He was no longer just talking to the room. He was talking directly to his wife and her family. But before we build the future, he said, his voice dropping to a more personal, almost intimate level, I believe it is important to understand the value of things, not just their price, but their true worth. Things like loyalty, integrity, respect. He looked at Isabella. Her face was a shattered mosaic of emotions: shock, betrayal, fear, and something else, something he hadn't seen in a long time, a flicker of awe. The man she had called a loser was standing before her, revealed as a king. And in that moment, she understood the devastating truth. She had betrayed the king, not the jester. My father-in-law once told me I didn't have the killer instinct, Alex said, his gaze shifting to the pale, trembling man beside him. He was right. I have no interest in killing. I'm an architect. I prefer to build. But I also know that before you can build something new and strong, you sometimes have to tear down the old, rotten structures. He looked out at the sea of stunned faces. He had their complete, undivided attention. The power in the room had not just shifted, it had undergone a seismic, tectonic reversal. The humiliated had become the powerful. The arrogant had been rendered impotent. The gala can continue, Alex said with a final calm authority. The charities supported tonight are more important than any of this. My new executive team and I will be in the founder's suite upstairs to answer any serious questions. Thank you. He gave a slight nod, turned, and walked off the stage, leaving behind a ballroom filled with the sound of 1,000 shattered assumptions. He didn't look back. The immediate aftermath was a blur of controlled chaos. As Alex stepped off the stage, he was met not by anger or recrimination, but by a crush of people. Bankers, investors, rival CEOs, men and women who had been offering him pitying smiles minutes earlier, now jostled to shake his hand, to slap his back, to whisper congratulations and frantic offers of partnership into his ear. The scent of fear and opportunity was thick in the air. Power is a potent aphrodisiac, and Alex was suddenly the most powerful man in the room. Marcus was there, a solid anchor in the swirling tide. He clapped a firm hand on Alex's shoulder, his eyes gleaming with pride. "Theatrical but effective," he rumbled. "You've just given them a story they'll be telling for 20 years. Beside Marcus stood a sharp, intelligent-looking woman in her late 30s, whom Alex had greeted with a warm smile. This was Sarah Jenkins, his longtime chief of staff, the unexpected ally who had been his right hand throughout the entire clandestine operation. To the outside world, she was just a senior administrator. In reality, she was the newly minted chief operating officer of Apex Consolidated Holdings. "The founder's suite is secure, Alex," Sarah said, her voice a calm counterpoint to the surrounding frenzy. "Your new board is waiting. The press is going insane downstairs." Alex nodded, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. He saw Richard, hen-faced and looking suddenly old, being steered through a side door by two of his panicked board members. He saw Leo, red-faced and sputtering, arguing with a hotel security guard who was blocking his path to the stage. And he saw Isabella. She was standing alone now, a crimson island in a sea of tuxedos. The handsome tech CEO and her circle of friends had melted away, drawn towards the new center of gravity. People were giving her a wide berth, unsure how to approach the wife of the man who had just publicly decapitated her father's empire. She looked lost, vulnerable, and utterly terrified. Her eyes found his across the room, a desperate, pleading look. Alex felt a pang of something, not pity, but a deep, resonant sorrow for what their marriage had become, for the woman she could have been if she hadn't been so shackled to the expectations of her family. He gave a slight nod to Marcus and Sarah. "Go on up. I'll be there in a minute." He made his way towards her, the crowd parting before him as if he were Moses and they were the Red Sea. He stopped a few feet from her. The space between them felt like a mile-wide chasm. "Alex," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. I don't understand." "I think you do, Izzy," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I think for the first time, you understand completely. My father, Leo, Vantage," she stammered, her hands twisting the small clutch she was holding. "You destroyed them." "No," he corrected her. "They destroyed themselves. Their arrogance, their greed, their refusal to see value in anything they couldn't put a price tag on. I just held up a mirror." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "A mirror you've been holding up to me for years." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her perfectly made-up cheeks. "What you said up there, about loyalty, about respect, was that for me?" "It was for us," he said softly. "It was for the man I thought you married. The man who loved you not for your father's name or your social standing, but for the sharp, funny, vibrant woman I met in that art history class 20 years ago. I've been wondering where she went." She flinched as if he had slapped her. "So this was all a test? You put our marriage through this hell just to prove a point?" The old fire was back in her eyes, the familiar defensiveness. "This wasn't a test, Isabella," he said, his voice losing its gentleness, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "This was a diagnosis. I had a disease in my life, a cancer of disrespect and contempt that was slowly killing me. I had to find out if it was malignant. I had to find out if the person who was supposed to be my partner was on my side, or if she was part of the disease." He took a step closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "When I came home and told you I was demoted, I was hoping for one of four responses. We'll get through this. I still believe in you. It's just a job, I love you. Or even just a hug. Any of those would have ended this. I would have told you the truth right then, and we would have laughed about it tonight, together, as partners." He let the words hang there, a ghost of a different, better evening. "But you didn't say any of those things, Did you, Izzy? You said, I married a loser. You didn't see a man in pain. You saw a stain on your reputation. You didn't see your husband. You saw a failed investment. She started to sob then, deep, racking sobs that shook her entire body. Alex, I'm sorry, she choked out. I'm so, so sorry. I know you're sorry now, he said, and the weariness in his voice was profound. The question is, what are you sorry for? Are you sorry for how you treated me? Or are you just sorry you bet on the wrong horse? He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked away, leaving her weeping in the middle of the ballroom. As he walked towards the elevators that would take him up to his new life, he felt a profound sense of release. The final act of the play was over. The curtain had fallen. And now, for the first time in a long time, he had no idea what came next. And it was the most liberating feeling in the world. The days that followed the gala were a blur of seismic shifts, both professional and personal. The business world was set ablaze by the story of Alex's audacious corporate coup. He was the talk of every boardroom and financial news channel, a modern-day Odysseus who had outsmarted the Cyclops. His picture was on the cover of magazines, no longer as a mere architect, but as a titan of industry. The name Apex Consolidated Holdings was on everyone's lips. The company's newly consolidated stock soared. For Richard and Leo Thorne, the consequences were swift and brutal. Their world had not just been shaken, it had been vaporized. The public humiliation was only the beginning. The collapse of Vantage architecture, in which they were massively overleveraged, triggered a cascade of financial ruin. Richard had used his own company's stock as collateral for many of the loans he had funneled into Vantage. When the dust settled, he had lost controlling interest in Thorne Enterprises, the company he had spent his life building. He was forced out by a panicked board, left with a fraction of his former fortune and a reputation that was utterly destroyed. He retreated to his mansion, a king dethroned in his own empty castle, refusing to take anyone's calls. Leo fared even worse. He had been engaged in even riskier side betting, using derivatives to gamble on Vantage's success. He was not just ruined, he was in debt to people far more dangerous than his father's bankers. His sports car was repossessed. His memberships were revoked. The sycophants who had once laughed at his jokes now crossed the street to avoid him. He was a pariah, stripped of the two things that had defined him, his money and his father's name. Alex took no pleasure in their downfall. From his new office, a sprawling, light-filled space on the top floor of the Titan Tower, he observed the wreckage with a kind of detached sadness. He had not set out to destroy them, merely to neutralize them as a threat to his own enterprise. Their complete self-destruction was a result of their own hubris, a fire fueled by their own greed. It was a stark lesson in poetic justice. His life, meanwhile, had been utterly transformed. He no longer lived in the cold, white mausoleum he had shared with Isabella. He had moved into a penthouse apartment in the city, a space that was warm, comfortable, and filled with books and art he actually loved. His days were long and demanding, filled with the genuine challenges of building a new corporate empire, but they were his own. He was surrounded by people who respected his intellect and valued his vision. Marcus, Sarah, and a new team of bright, loyal executives. He was finally, fully himself. But the question of Isabella remained. She had tried to reach him, of course. A barrage of texts, voicemails, emails. They ranged from desperate apologies to furious accusations, sometimes in the same message. He didn't respond. He needed space. He needed to let the dust settle, to see where the pieces landed, both for him and for her. About a month after the gala, his assistant informed him that an Isabella Thorne was in the lobby, insisting on seeing him. He hesitated for a long moment. Then he said, "Send her up." She walked into his office and he was struck by how different she looked. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple, elegant trousers and a silk blouse. Her hair was pulled back simply, and she wore minimal makeup. She looked less like a socialite and more like the woman he had first met. She also looked tired, with faint circles under her eyes. She stopped in the middle of the vast office, looking around at the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city he now commanded. "It's quite a view," she said softly. "I like it," he replied, remaining behind his large, uncluttered desk. An awkward silence stretched between them. "I went to see my father," she said finally, her voice fragile. "He wouldn't open the door. I could hear him inside, just sitting there, in the dark." She looked at Alex, her eyes searching for a flicker of guilt. She found none. "And Leo is gone. He left a note, said he was going somewhere no one could find him." "I'm sorry to hear that, Izzy," Alex said, and he meant it. He was sorry for her pain, even if he was not the cause of its ultimate source. "Are you?" she asked, a hint of the old bitterness in her voice. "Are you really?" "I am sorry that your family built its house on a foundation of sand," he said. "I am not sorry that I refused to let them drag me down with them when the tide came in." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time she didn't let them fall. She took a deep, shaky breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, "about what you said, at the gala, about the woman you met in art history class." She looked down at her hands. I think I've been hiding from her for a long time. It was easier to be Richard Thorne's daughter. It was easier to care about the things he cared about. Status, appearances, winning. She looked up, and for the first time, Alex saw not a reflection of her father's ambition or her mother's social anxiety, but a flicker of genuine introspection. "When I said that horrible thing to you, I married a loser, it wasn't really about you. It was about me. It was the voice of my father in my head. The voice that has always told me that my worth is tied to the success of the man I am with." She took a tentative step closer to the desk. "I am so sorry, Alex. Not because you're now rich and powerful. Not because I bet on the wrong horse. I'm sorry because you were my husband, and you were in pain, and I kicked you when you were down. I betrayed our partnership. I betrayed you." This was it. This was the apology he had been waiting for. Not an apology for being wrong, but an apology for being unkind. He was silent for a long time, studying her face. He saw the cracks in her armor, the genuine remorse, but he also saw 20 years of learned behavior, a lifetime of conditioning. Change was not a single event. It was a long, arduous process. "What do you want, Isabella?" he asked finally. "I want a chance," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Not to go back to how things were, God, not that, but to start over, to see if we can find those two people from art history class again, to build a marriage based on respect and friendship, to see if I can be a partner you actually deserve." Alex stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. Below him, traffic flowed like blood through the city's arteries. Cranes dotted the skyline, his cranes, building his new vision. The world was at his feet. He could have anything, anyone. But the question that lingered was not what he could have, but what he truly wanted. He thought about the lonely silence of his beautiful new apartment. He thought about his victory and how hollow it felt to celebrate it alone. He had won the war, but in doing so, had he lost the only thing that might have mattered? He turned back to her. She stood there, stripped of her social armor, her wealth, her family's name. She was just a woman, flawed and broken, asking for a second chance. "I don't know if we can find those people again, Izzy," he said honestly. "I don't know if that marriage can be rebuilt. A lot of damage has been done." He saw her face fall, and he held up a hand. "But," he continued, "I know that the architect in me believes that sometimes the strongest structures are the ones that have been broken and then reinforced, the ones that show their scars." He walked back to his desk and picked up a pen and a piece of paper. He wrote down an address. "This is the address of a little Italian restaurant downtown. It's not fancy. They don't care who your father is, but they make the best carbonara in the city. He held the paper out to her. Be there Friday at 8. Come as you are. We'll have dinner, and we'll just talk. No talk of business or money or family, just us. And we'll see if there's a foundation left to build on. She took the piece of paper from his hand, her fingers brushing his. A tiny spark, a ghost of a forgotten connection. I'll be there, she whispered, clutching the paper like a lifeline. She turned and walked out of his office, leaving him alone with the view. He didn't know if it would work. The odds were probably against them. But as he looked out at the city, at the endless possibilities stretching to the horizon, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not triumph, not vindication, but hope. The ultimate lesson, he reflected, was not about the satisfying fall of the arrogant or the triumphant rise of the underdog. It was quieter, more profound. True strength wasn't about the power you displayed, but the integrity you maintained in the face of disrespect. True wealth wasn't measured in stock portfolios, but in the loyalty of those who stand by you when you have nothing else to offer. He had faked a demotion to unearth a truth, and in the end, the truth had set them all free, in one way or another. Whether that freedom would lead them back to each other, only time would tell. The first blueprint for a new structure had been drawn. The real work of building was about to begin. What do you think? Is a second chance possible after a betrayal like that? Can people truly change, or are we just destined to repeat our patterns? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being here for this story. If you found value in it, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about the complexities of life and the human heart. Until next time, remember to build your life on a foundation of integrity. It's the only thing that truly lasts.